Well, thank you everybody for being here this afternoon. I know everybody's really busy, and so I appreciate your time. My name is Dr. Christine Hallman, and I am professor of geography here at NSU, and I've been here 12 years, which time flies. This afternoon, I'm going to be talking about seeing the earth as sacred, lessons from environmental warriors. Oops, got it. Okay, thanks. Before I get started, I wanted to acknowledge that NSU campuses are situated on the ancestral lands of a variety of tribal nations, including but not limited to Caddo, Osage, Washita, Kickapoo, Lakota, and Quapaw, and on the current homelands of Cherokee Nation, United Cthulhu Band of the Cherokee Indians, and Muscogee Nation. I also want to honor and thank the land, water, and other beings of these places as they have stories. And remember, I'm committed to continually learning about Indigenous issues and building relationships with all beings. So we kind of have to define our terms. First and foremost, when I talk about seeing the earth as sacred, what does the word sacred mean? So this is the interactive portion of the lecture today. So does anybody want to be brave enough and tell me what sacred means? Don't be shy. What did you say?
A value that should not be impinged.
Okay, a value that should not be impinged. Okay, good.
Those things that are central to our spiritual existence.
Central to our spiritual existence. Good, good. Anybody else? Being thankful. That's great. Good. Anybody else? It's kind of, well, go ahead, sorry. Irreplaceable. That's a great word. Irreplaceable. All of you are correct. Each and every one of us sees the word sacred differently. Some through a religious or spiritual bent, some more secular, meaning that it's precious, rare, unique, something we hold dear, something we're responsible for and respect. And you will, and I encourage you to look through your own lens of what that definition is for you when we kind of talk about and go across the globe to talk about the earth as sacred.
We have someone in the chat that's
Sure.
given an example as well. Sacred is a special, possibly spiritual value to particular people.
And that's exactly right. All those answers I actually have a common thread, right? And in fact, it's our connection to something else, something often that's greater than ourselves. Great. I just have some images here just so you can see what I'm saying. The bristlecone pine are the trees that I study. Those are the oldest trees on planet Earth that you can date to the year. The oldest one living is over 4,600 years old, and it lives in Eastern California. That's where I was a park ranger. And so those are two images. And then my son, Max, he's in the Red River of Kentucky, which is Southern Kentucky, just right outside my hometown. All of which trees and sun, sacred, but also in a place. And seeing all things in a place and that connection between them is also sacred and important part of seeing the earth as sacred. Now, when we get started here, we're going to kind of visit different locations around the globe and spend very, very short amount of times with environmental warriors. And the first place we're going to go is Australia. So with Aboriginal Australians and Torres Strait Islanders, some of them, they see the landscape differently. It's as if they are part of the landscape. Now, when I say map, usually what people think is a piece of paper, your phone, a screen, a poster, something visual. But in fact, that map is auditory, not mental, but auditory. Some Aboriginal Australians sing their way across the landscape. They sing and they acknowledge different things, animals, habitats, plants, wells, springs along the landscape. If they did not sing, they would be lost. And so embedded in that landscape and seeing their way across it, an auditory map. This type is usually referred to as songlines. These are ceremonial, they have ritual, they are sacred. And they are represented in art, as you see on the images in front of you. and also in dance and other performance. And one of the great lessons here with Songlines is that this is a holistic look at the earth. The earth isn't in bits, it's all interconnected. Things are in relation to each other on the landscape. Singing the song connects all things, including the individual, with place. There's this author, Tyson Yunkaporta, who's an Aboriginal Australian, and he wrote a book recently called Sand Talk. And one of the phrases he uses in the book is called embedded in the landscape. So humans aren't above the landscape looking down. We're not on the landscape. We are within the landscape, interconnecting us with all things. And seeing those sacred relationships is a way to see the earth as sacred. Songlines. All right, now we're going to go across the globe to American Southwest and Northwest Mexico. And we're going to visit a place that's called the Tohono reservation and homelands. What you see here in brown is the original or some of the original homelands of the Tohono, and in red is the reservation. Notice right away that these homelands are divided by international boundary, which has a lot of ramifications. One of the Tohono that I love, she's a wonderful poet, Ophelia Zapata, and from her book, Ocean Power, Poems from the Desert, which seems a little ironic. I want to read that, but I'm not going to read it in Odom because I can barely speak English. So I'll save you from that. It's called Pulling Down the Clouds. With my harvesting stick, I will hook the clouds. With my harvesting stick, I will pull down the clouds. With my harvesting stick, I will stir the clouds. Now, a harvesting stick is what you see in that top left picture there. And traditional harvesting was done by women. And that's a big saguaro cactus. Every April, it produces these beautiful white blooms. And in May, this beautiful red fruit. And so traditionally, women would harvest them using those sticks. The fruit would be used for drinks or other foodstuffs. And so in this instant, Ophelia Zapata is kind of tossing back this idea and connecting back to tradition and culture through that harvesting stick. With dreams of distant noise disturbing his sleep, the smell of dirt wet for the first time in what seems like months. The change in the molecules is sudden. They enter the nasal cavity. He contemplates that smell. What is that smell? It's rain. Rain somewhere out in the desert. Comforted in this knowledge, he turns over and continues his sleep. Dreams of women with harvesting sticks raised toward the sky. So this part is pretty essential to this connection to place. So my 12 years in the deserts, in the Sonoran Desert in Tucson, I learned how sacred water is. Tucson receives about 11 or 12 inches of rainfall every year, about half in the winter and half during monsoon season. So you learn quickly the preciousness of water. And when it rains in this huge valley where Tucson is, you might not see the rain, you might not hear the rain, you might not feel the rain, but you can smell the rain. When it rains in the desert, the rain interacts with creosote and it gives off this aroma that's distinct. And you know right away, somewhere it's raining. And so one of the great lessons with this one poem is this connection of culture, tradition, and place, all at the same time, reminding us of the importance of tradition and connection to a given place. The indomitable and powerful Winona LaDuke, Anishinaabe, she lives on the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota, beautiful country up there. She helped found the Indigenous Women's Network. She worked with women of all red nations to publicize the American forced sterilization of American Indian women, which took place through the 1960s, 70s, and even cases in the 1980s. I'll let that sit in a second. She founded the White Earth Land Recovery Project. But what I really want to talk about is her focus, not on one part of the earth and the environmental issues that we have, but this holistic picture of connection. She focuses on reforestation in parts of the upper Great Plains and upper Midwest. She's focused on wild rice or manoomin, and them gaining personhood or natural human rights, the importance of protecting wild rice from pipelines, and the connection not just as rice as a food, but as a part of lifeways and traditions in Anishinaabe Ojibwe culture. The importance of food sovereignty and incorporating native seeds into the diet. Ojibwe language, buffalo, sturgeon. Let's talk about sturgeon. So sturgeon, huge fish, right? So in a couple of her YouTube videos, speeches, which I encourage you to check out because she's definitely fierce when she talks. But she talked about her and her kids going to Canada, taking some sturgeon and illegally crossing the border back into Minnesota and releasing them into waterways where that sturgeon used to live, but were extinct. So she does what's right. She knows her own truth, and she follows that. She's also involved in a wide variety of renewable energy, solar, wind, and the list goes on. Executive Director of Honor the Earth, which is a Native environmental advocacy organization, and continually fights against pipelines, Dakota Access Pipelines, Keystone Pipelines, Enbridge, that's who she's been protesting lately, using her voice. One of the most important lessons from Winona LaDuke is to use your voice, step into your power, see all those connections in the earth with you and with all things, and make a difference. One of my favorite quotes is, "There is no social change fairy. There is only change by the hand of individuals." It's a call to action. We can no longer sit on the sideline. We have to step forward and do something. Use your voice, whatever that may be. It could be actually your voice. It could be through writing and art, music, dance, whatever that means to you. It's time to step up. One of the most important lessons. And then one of my favorite quotes from Winona LaDuke, "Water is life. We are the people who live by the water, pray by these waters, eat and drink from these waters. We are related to those who live in the water. To poison the waters is to show disrespect for creation. To honor and protect the waters is our responsibility as people of the land." So through all things, we are related, not in a hierarchical system, but in a non-hierarchical system where all parts of Earth's interrelated and ever-changing systems on Earth, we're all parts of that. And one part missing makes everything else messed up. So water is life. All right, let's talk about Grandma Josephine Endowment. And she is Anishinaabe First Nations Canada, and another powerhouse, founder of Mother Earth Water Walkers, survivor of the Canadian Indian residential school system. As an elder, she walked over 25,000 miles around the Great Lakes and other waterways in North America, including the St. Lawrence, with a copper bucket of water, praying for the water, talking to the water, educating people about the water. In her own way, she stepped forth, knew that it was important, and she did it. She and her great niece, Autumn Peltier, are called home to an island in the Huron, which is in light green up there on the map. And as a child, Autumn saw her great aunt and followed in her footsteps. As a young child, she talked with Prime Minister Trudeau from Canada about issues relating to water boils on First Nation reserves that had been going on for decades. And she said, "Why can't we all have clean drinking water?" It didn't stop there. As a teenager, she went and she talked to the United Nations, again, about access to clean drinking water. In 2019, she was named Chief Commissioner for the Anishinaabe Nation. And still, she remembers her great aunt and those lessons that she taught her on the way. Both warriors. Grandma Josephine is the inspiration for this kid's book called The Water Walker, which I encourage you to check out, especially if you have kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, anybody. It's a really, really great book. Now, some lessons. It's hard to kind of narrow down some lessons, but Grandma Josephine. We've known for a long time that water is alive. Water can hear you. Water can sense It can sense what you're saying and you're feeling. There's been a place where I put tobacco in the water, where the water is so still, it was dead. I prayed for it. I put my tobacco in the water and the tobacco started floating around. So the water came alive. It heard my prayers. It heard the song. So I know it listens. And it came alive. It comes alive if you pray, pay attention to it, give it respect, and it can come alive. Like anything, like a person who is sick, if you give them love, take care of them, they'll come alive. They'll feel better. It's the same with our mother, the earth and the water. Give it love. Autumn Peltier, our water deserves to be treated as human with human rights, which we'll come back to later on today. We need to acknowledge our waters with personhood so we can protect our waters. And in that conversation with the United Nations, she ended her conversation with, we all need to warrior up. Again, a call to action. We see these connections that we have in this case with water, but really with all things on earth. It's time, we have to do something. We all need to warrior up in our own way. All right, let's go to Honduras. Berta Cáceres Flores from the Lincoln people, indigenous southwestern Honduras, which have experienced civil unrest and violence, and that's putting it nicely, for decades. She comes from a long line of strong women. And as an adult, she co-founded and was a coordinator of the Council of Popular Indigenous Organizations of Honduras. She led campaigns and protests against illegal logging, plantation owners, and the presence of the U.S. military. She also led protests and actions for women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, social and indigenous issues in general. But what they focused on in 2006 was a grassroots movement to basically stop dam construction along a river. Now, the people who were constructing the dams were not any companies in Honduras. They were outside, foreign investors from places like China, France, the United States. And they started this grassroots movement with protests and large groups of people trying to have these conversations about access to water, food, and medicinal plants. And eventually it worked. They stopped the dam, the investors pulled out. Something similar happened on the Rio Blanco a few years later. This time they went to court. And she led the Lincoln people in court and in community meetings. And again, they protested in the streets. They walked. They had sit-ins. They blocked roadways. Again, to try to get these constructions of the dams to be stopped. Nobody asked the Lincoln people if they wanted dams. Nobody asked the Lincoln people if it was okay to basically deforest huge swaths of their homelands. So Berta stepped up and they organized, and eventually that changed. And with her voice and her power came a movement. When we started the fight for the Rio Blanco, I would go to the river. I could feel what the water was telling me. I knew it was going to be difficult, but I also knew we were going to triumph because the river told me so. And in fact, they did triumph, but it came at a price. In 2016, Berta was at home. There were people who snuck into her home and murdered her because she used her voice against those damn, pun intended, companies. And she was fierce and strong and wasn't afraid. She knew what was important. She knew that those connections of her people to the land were important enough to sacrifice for. And Berta did. Mary and Carrie Dan. So Western Shoshone elders, spiritual leaders, ranchers, and don't they look like a couple of activists? They're also sisters. In 1973, they were grazing. They've been grazing for many years on what's called BLM land. BLM means Bureau of Land Management. Bureau of Land Management is responsible for a number of federal lands in the West. They also give leases and permits for things like deforestation, oil extraction, mining, the use of water and waterways, a wide variety of things, including grazing. And they said, hey, you can't graze here, this isn't your land. Well, it's not the thing to say to a couple of sisters. In 1979, the Indian Claims Commission awarded $26 million to the Shoshone for the land. They refused. They said, you took the land, we didn't sell it. It's still our land and you didn't abide by any of the other treaties. So we don't accept that payment. And if you're familiar with the same thing, Lakota and the Black Hills, refusing that payment. In 1998, man, that's a huge time. The BLM issued trespass notices to the sisters. Said, you can't graze here anymore. You've grazed enough. You know, we're done. You need to pay the bill or you need to quit grazing. The sisters refused, and they immediately filed a request with the United Nations. And they called for action, not only for the grazing lands that the BLM said they couldn't graze on, but also millions of acres in Nevada and bordering states. And said, those aren't government lands, they're ours. By treaty, they're our lands. And so that fight continues, even after the passing of the sisters. In 2007, Carrie was arrested at Nevada testing site. If you don't know, Nevada has been utilized for a wide variety of tests, including nuclear tests throughout history. A lot of that land was Shoshone and Paiute. And so she was arrested and eventually got out. And then in 2008, she sued in federal court the United States and a Canadian gold mine for producing what's referred to as the largest open pit cyanide leach, basically meth. The tailings produced by removing gold from the land and its processing leaves a wide variety of horrible chemicals behind, including cyanide. And they were doing this on a sacred mountain in Nevada. There was really no resolution for that either. And I pull out this one quote that I've seen in different forms for a while by different people, but it's just as important. I have voiced again and again, Western Shoshone land, our Mother Earth, is not for sale. So Carrie said this. So it's not for sale. And this means a lot of things. One of which that we belong to the earth and we are protectors of the earth. And we can't just go and use and abuse the earth for whatever reason. We are responsible for Mother Earth. A couple of fighters, don't they look like a couple of warriors, Steve? It's something to be said about grannies, man. All right, Isabella Abbott. She grew up on Maui, spent her childhood gathering different kinds of seaweed with her mom. And eventually she would become the first Native American woman to earn a PhD in science, any science field. First woman on the biological faculty at Stanford, first female full professor there, first minority full professor there. She's a leading expert in Pacific algae, seaweed. When she retired in 1982, she returned to her homeland. And at the university there, she started a degree in ethnobotany. Botany, of course, the study of plants. Ethno, this is human connection to plants, right? Culture, traditions associated with plants. Not just their uses, but the stories and lessons they might tell. Now, eventually, she was named a living treasure, as she should be. Dr. Abbott, she did a lot of things. One of the cool things that she did is all that time growing up and remembering seaweed and the stories that she was told as a child. That was her foundation of trying to understand how the earth works, right? That's science. How do things work? Well, she took what she already knew, and then she went to school in Western science, and she learned everything that, they had to tell. But what was great is she interwove this indigenous knowledge in science with Western knowledge in science. Not saying it's worse or below Western science, but they are equal. And reinforcing this idea that indigenous knowledge really is equal to all other knowledges, just as powerful. And in fact, a lot of ways more powerful, because indigenous science sees things as a whole, right? How everything is in relation to everything else. Western science tends to have bits, and I learned about this part, and I learned about this part, and then we try to put things back together. And in that, a lot of times we miss them. So Dr. Abbott, she has some really cool books. If you're interested, you should check them Sophia Yanok, she's Sami. Sami are the only indigenous people in Europe. They live in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and parts of Russia. She's an artist, a singer, a songwriter. She's a radio host, a producer. And one of the cool things about her is she sings in Yonk. And I don't know if anybody's heard any Yonk style singing, but it's pretty wicked cool. And it's traditional Sami. And there are a couple of videos at the bottom, YouTube videos. I'd encourage you to check those out. It's really cool. And it reminds us that for some, we talk a lot, like I'm doing today. But singing carries the words and what we feel and know into every corner of every space. Talking sometimes doesn't do that. So she's an activist. She's fought against mines and open pit mines in her homeland that have interfered with traditional reindeer herders. That's where her people are. And it's not just about economics, herding deer. It's a part of who she is. It's her culture embedded in her. And because she lives in northern latitudes, she sees climate change in her face every day as the changes in seasons and the amount of ice and weather systems change and critters from the south move up, like different insects. She sees all this. And so through her words and her song and her actions, she pushes for change and she pushes for decolonization. And we don't have time to talk about decolonization. But one aspect is removing this hierarchy and seeing things as interconnected. And that's one of her many wishes. A quote by her: "We only borrow earth as our home. We can never possess it. We have to leave it the way it was when we first arrived." So one of the important lessons from her is it's about the next generation. It's about the grandkids. It's about 7 generations and beyond. Again, a call to action for us to do something. We have to see the earth as interconnected and sacred, care for it, and then do something about it. Wangari Maathai, the first East African woman to earn a PhD. It happened to be in veterinary science and biology. When she returned to her homeland in Kenya, she saw it in disarray. It had spent decades under British colonial rule, and then later under a dictatorship that had basically deforested areas of Kenya, caused massive stream erosion and soil erosion. All that soil, when you cut the trees down, ends up in the river, destroys the habitats and everything downstream. She saw this, but she didn't see just one single problem. So she didn't see one single solution. But the one thing that had in common was community. She started a nonprofit called the Greenbelt Movement. And the Greenbelt Movement would pay for rural women to grow from seed trees. If they survived to a certain size, then they would be planted. And the movement has planted over 50 million trees in Kenya since it began, probably way more than that now. And through this, the movement was able to empower poor rural women, right? They had money, so they had influence over economics, and they started to learn about using their voice. So they began to ask why things were the way they were. They began to protest for democracy against dictatorship. Wangari Maathai, she was beaten on at least 2 occasions as part of her protest and almost died. In 2003 or 4, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her actions. You cannot enslave a mind that knows itself, that values itself, that understands itself. So if you know who you are and where you stand, and that you have the strength, then you can accomplish anything. In the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called to shift to a new level of consciousness, to reach a higher moral ground, a time when we have to shed our fear and give hope to each other. That time is here. Let's go all the way to New Zealand, talk about the indigenous Maori. For over 140 years, Maori fought in court, in legislation with the New Zealand government to get a section of the Wanganui River seen as a living entity, to give it personhood, so that it has its own rights. And 140 years later, in 2017, they accomplished that. So a section of the Wanganui River has a right not to be polluted, not to be degraded, and a right not to be overdrawn, and is given 2 guardians, human voices, to speak for it in a court of law. Now, I want you to think about it, 140 years. So this means this was a multi-generational fight for personhood, so that we see this river not as a thing, right? Not as something we use, but as its own existence, its own entity, its own person. So it should have those rights. An important lesson of persisting, right? Always persist. Okay. Xochitl Guadalupe Cruz Lopez. Talk about a warrior right there. She was born in 2009, Indigenous from Chiapas, Mexico, which is located here. And at the age of 4, she was entering and winning science fairs. Boy, talk about, brain power extraordinaire. Age of 4, man, I was playing in the dirt making mud pies. So at the age of 8, she had created a low-cost, environmentally friendly solar water. So at the time where she lived, it was rural and poor. And they were cutting down trees for fuel to heat the water. So what she did is she recycled some bottles, painted them black, put them on a rooftop, and cycled it through many times so that it warmed the water. In 2018, she was the first child to ever win the ICN Women's Recognition Award from Mexico's National Autonomous University. She aspires to earn a doctorate in math, which I have no doubt she will do. Many lessons here. 1, you're never too young to see a problem, to try multiple solutions, to fail, and the courage to get back up and keep trying until you succeed. An important lesson, no matter what you do. The powerhouse. Oh, let's move a little bit closer to home. Let's talk about Bell, Oklahoma. In the 1980s, Bell had about 500 people, mostly Native, mostly Cherokee. And yet another force of nature, Wilma Mankiller, who at the time was director of Cherokee Nation Community Development Department, and her future husband, worked together on grants and getting funded for a 16-mile water line to Bell. So this is the 1980s. Some of you were born before then, some of you weren't. 1980s is not that far away. People didn't have water, access to clean drinking water. Where I grew up in Kentucky, we call that city water, not well water. And the key here was that Cherokee Nation will provide materials and any kind of, instruction on how to do things. But it all came down to labor. So the residents of Bell and surrounding areas worked together to dig and install a 16-mile water line. 16 miles doesn't seem very much. If anybody's been around Bell or Adel County, though, you know it ain't flat, right? So it was a lot of hard work, right? And one key thing here was community. Now, the Cherokee concept is Gadugi. So Gadugi, translated into English, is usually that community, but really Gadugi is so much more. It's kinship. It's how we treat each other. It's how we take care of each other. It's like a family. And so this is a great example of Gadugi, everybody working together to solve a problem. In 2021, Chief Hoskins signed the Mankiller Soap Water Act, eliminating barriers to clean water access on the reservation, replacing aging water lines, and trying to identify anybody who still doesn't have access to water. I'd encourage you to, we all know, hopefully, Chief Wilma Mankiller. She has an autobiography you should read. If you haven't, you need to. There's also tons of videos. This one's a PBS that talks about this specifically. There's also the Mankiller documentary that the library has. I encourage you to check that out. And then the Cherokee Word for Water movie, which is kind of focused on this time period. I'd really encourage you to check that out, considering we're in Eastern Oklahoma. Lessons, community. Community is key. Calibration is key. Collaboration is key. We can't get anywhere without each other. Now, there are other warriors. The Save the Illinois River nonprofit focuses on the Illinois River, Lake Tenkiller, and the Illinois River Basin. So this is a bunch of people working together to try to solve some of the issues associated with the Illinois. It focuses on water quality, but also water quantity, how much is in there, particularly in drought years. So they do everything from go out and help pick up trash along the river, all the way to presenting in court cases, having strong words with larger cities in Arkansas, as part of the river basins in Arkansas, and talking to those larger cities and asking, are your sewer treatment plants adequate for your population? If not, we need to do something about that, because whatever's in the upper basin flows downhill where the rest of us are. And they also focus on agriculture, particularly mega poultry farms and runoff from those, but also the river itself and recreation. So there's an estimate of about 500,000 people visit the Illinois River and Lake Tenkiller every year. There's not 500,000 people in Tahlequah. I'm just saying. They got to come from somewhere. 200,000 of them get in the river or ride watercraft in the river. 200,000 people in the river. So this all has an impact on water quality and how we relate to the water. So if you live here or around here, water is pretty key. And this is a great way to plug in. So you're not by yourself. You want to, collaborate and work with others. There are organizations that already exist for us to tap into and start to work with. And STIR is one of those. A couple of others, the Spring Creek Coalition and the Green Country Guardians, both focused mostly on water quality. It might be related to agriculture, but other things too. The Spring Creek Coalition goes out and collects water samples. They also have town meetings like the Green Country Guardians did. They're also involved in court cases. This is fighting for our water. If you live here in Eastern Oklahoma, just like STIR does. So they're advocating for us already. So what I've learned from being here for 12 years is sometimes students are a little hesitant to have conversations about the importance of water or the environment or doing something. And by taking a look and maybe working with some of these organizations, they can step out and do something. Those conversations are important to have with your friends and family. And one way to do that is to become involved. It's all about community and role models for that matter. Now you can find environmental warriors all over, as we've visited all places around the globe, even close to home in Eastern Oklahoma. Okay, I'm gonna try to get through this. So you see them on campus. And sometimes they get here and they're already environmental warriors. Man, those are gems. And then sometimes they take a class and they end up environmental warriors of some sort and go on. Others, they participate in a wide variety of activities, like Amaya and Leah there, Illinois River Water Quality Study. We were out in the river in late July and August this year. Others use their voice, like Jamie. It's like magic happens. You talk about one thing and students, they go do research. Yes, they go do research and they find out all these cool things, how they can make choices that can help the environment, what they can do to make a difference. And it's a pretty powerful transformation to see that. No matter if they arrive as the environmental protectors or if they leave as them. These are important voices. They take many forms and they are my inspiration. To learn more, I'd encourage you to check out this YouTube link at the top. This is Indigenous Amazonian. He's a wonderful speaker, by the way. And then the Goldman Environmental Prize. They award every year one person from each region around the world. And this is a great way to find out about environmental issues across the board. Again, my talk today had several environmental warriors. I didn't have time to talk about lots more. We can definitely do that later. But I'd encourage you to check these out. And I show video clips to the water issues class and the warrior woman class. Every year there's something new and something to be learned. So let's return to the beginning, right? Why is it so important to see the earth as sacred? So we talked about what sacred means. So what's the big deal? Why is it so important to see the earth as sacred? What do you guys think? Future generations, great, good. Gives us life. Gives us life. Good. Why is it so? Yeah.
Both morality and just practicality.
That's right. That's right. Morality. That's right. Practicality. What do you mean?
What are we gonna eat? What are we gonna mix it? What are we gonna breathe?
That's exactly right. That's
What are,
exactly.
what's gonna, yeah, sorry.
No. That's exactly right. Great. Anybody else?
I just think all the species and everything around us is so magical and mysterious, and without all of that, I just can't imagine life
Right.
without all, I mean, not just human centered,
Mhm.
just all creatures and all elements of the earth,
That's exactly right.
everything.
It's interconnected, right? We're all in relation to each other. That's right. No, you're, no.
All right, just want to make sure.
No, I'm not done yet.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
I don't know what time it is, but I'm not.
Okay, all right. Okay. So I'm gonna make
That's,
some changes.
no, we're still good. I got a few more slides. So there's this one quote, and it's by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she wrote this book, Braiding, Sweetgrass. Has anybody read it? You should check it out. She's Potawatomi, and the book is filled with all sorts of stories about interconnection and the natural world. So I pulled one quote: knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend, protect, and celebrate. That's pretty true. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. So caring for and being responsible for and loving, right, the earth is one thing. But when you realize that the earth and all its parts and beings love you in return, that's a sacred bond. And we can't sit idly by when injustice happens. One way to kind of get our minds around it is through language. Language is how we see the world. It's our perspectives. It's that lens we look through. And this slide represents water in numerous languages. This reminds us of our diversity, but at the same time, water, of all things, connects us in the air, right, flowing on the surface, in the surface, below the surface, in the oceans, continually moving, interconnecting us in our own bodies and outside. That connection is vital. Now I put this picture in. Ceremony is complicated. I'm not native, so I'm not going to discuss that. But the picture reminds me, the person is in contact with the land, right? We need to go out in nature. We need to unplug. We need to put the phone away. We need to whatever, get away from, the screen that I'm in front of. Go sit under a tree. Go listen to the water. Wonder why the dragonfly does this weird flying thing. We need to see that. Think about the stories that these other beings can tell us. The lessons, right? Water, it can be calm and powerful. It's persistent in its weathering of rock. It's adaptable and malleable. All important lessons. And only through our own experience, individually and together, can we build that connection, right, to nature, to the natural world. Hanging out in nature, right, lowers our stress hormones, makes us more creative, helps us think and communicate better, all positives. And so only through that experience. I often tell students, it's difficult to just describe this relationship with place or landscape. But for me, I am Kentucky, And Kentucky is me. I grew up in Kentucky. I have roots in Oklahoma. I have roots in Arizona and California, but Kentucky is who I am. And it is in me. It's in my blood and it's all throughout me. And that connection stays. I've been gone from Kentucky, living on Kentucky soil for 24 years. And yet it still calls to me. It still wants me to visit along with my family and my mom's fried chicken. But that connection and visiting nature, the natural world, that's how we build these relationships. And I'm going to leave you with this quote from Winona LaDuke. Power is not brute force and money. Power is in your spirit. Power is in your soul. It's what your ancestors, your old people gave you. Power is in the earth, and it is in your relationship to the earth. This is fundamental to everything that I talked about today. That relationship, that sacredness, seeing the earth as sacred and that it's filled with connection and relation will cause us to care and love and be connected to and responsible for so that we do something. It doesn't have to be anything big. It can be small things, right? Recycle the water bottles, right? Buy your own straw. Or like me, wear clothes from 20 years ago that are older than my students. It's not big things, but the little things build up to big things. And we have to remember that each one of us makes choices. And those choices are powerful. And we're all making them together. So I want to thank you guys for being here and spending some time with me. And thank Sophia Beverly and Dr. Lauterbach for inviting me here this afternoon.